It's time for me to introduce Dr. Harry Moody. Some of you probably know him through his textbook, Aging Concepts and Controversies, now in the 6th edition. Some of you probably know him because of his beautiful book, The 5 Stages of the Soul. He's written hundreds of journal articles, many, many books. He has several new book projects he's working on. You probably know that he's the Director of Academic Affairs for AARP in Washington, D.C., though now he's bilocating between Washington, D.C. and Boulder. He's working on a wide range of initiatives from social entrepreneurship to healthy aging. He is one of the most important thinkers in the field of gerontology, and I'm so honored that he was able to come and be our keynote speaker today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Harry Moody.
Good afternoon. I'm Joyce Tamanen with AARP in the 21st century, and I want to welcome you to a very special event. We have with us today one of the oldest living humans, Mr. Harry R. Moody. He was born back in the year 1945, and now, as you know, it is the year 2067. So that makes our guest 122 years old. Why, he's even old enough to remember the assassination of President Kennedy. Mr. Moody has agreed to share with us some of his memories of the 21st century, right up to the present day. So join with me, please, in welcoming our guest, our very special guest, Mr. Harry R. Moody. Good afternoon, Mr. Moody. I want to welcome you and thank you for being with us today. I can see it's not easy for you to get around, so we really appreciate your willingness to be here. They tell me today is your birthday. Is that right? But what year were you born in?
Well, Ellen, I was born in 1945. Yeah.
Okay, so that would make you 122 years old?
Yeah, I guess that's right. If you say so. I don't remember things so well anymore. Did you say your name was Susan?
I said it was Joyce.
Joyce. Yeah.
Okay.
Ellen, right.
Yeah,
okay.
right.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about your life back in the 20th century.
Well, I remember World War II and the Cold War. My father was in World War II, and I avoided the draft in Vietnam. And with the collapse of communism in 1989, we thought war was all over. And then came the World Trade Center attack in 2001, and Iraq and Afghanistan, all the wars that followed. In terms of my personal life, I got a degree in philosophy, which of course isn't the most practical thing to do. So instead of driving a taxi cab, which was my main opportunity, I went to work for a bank for a while, and then I went into gerontology. And things were okay for the first years of the 21st century. For a little while it was okay.
Well, tell us more about the early decade of the 21st century.
Well, you remember the World Trade Center attack and all the wars that followed, Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, North Korea, and all those other wars. And the president said that war would last for decades, and he sure was right about that one. It never seemed to end. The military spending just came higher and higher, and more attacks came, and the September 11th attack, was followed a decade later by that dirty bomb nuclear device that went off in Philadelphia on July 4th, 2011. A lot of the city was radioactive. People had to be evacuated, and the attacks and the counterattacks that just went on. India and Pakistan went to war with each other with nuclear weapons. Millions killed in that exchange, but I guess you remember that went on even after the collapse of the Islamic Republic of Arabia. The wars just never seemed to end. Never ended.
What about the U.S. economy?
Well, all that military activity was terrible for the economy, which was in bad shape to begin with. It started with the stock market collapse in 2008, which recovered for a year or two, and then it went down a second time. Worse than before. That was after Greece and Spain went bankrupt. The government tried to bail out the banks and the insurance companies like they did before. It worked for a while, but the deficits just got too big. And then the big banks, Citicorp, Bank of America, they held treasury bonds, and the Chinese stopped buying America's bonds. So eventually, they all went bankrupt. And there was nobody to bail us out, and so there was an international market panic. Unemployment went up to 15%, then 25%. Both my kids lost their jobs, and I was forced into early retirement. Stock market held on for a while, but then it finally collapsed in 2013. That's when the baby boomers started cashing in their mutual funds. And for the next 20 years, all the money went out of the market. The Dow went down to 4,000, where it stayed for most through mid-century, I guess. Federal government tried to use deficit spending to get us out of Depression 2.0, but it didn't work. And soon the Chinese owned all of America. And then the big inflation began. Oh, I remember that. It was 25% every year. People said it was like the Weimar Republic in Germany. And here in the U.S., we thought it could never happen here. But we were wrong.
Well, tell us about your health.
My health. Well, Mary, what did you say again?
Oh, Joyce.
Sorry, yeah, my health. Well, diet has been very important to me, because we all got to be pretty poor and meat became impossible. So after the age of 60, I ate mostly fruits and vegetables. Did I mention the plagues? Oh, there were so many of them. Oh, hemorrhagic plague, that was the worst. And the bleeding and all of that, oh, it was terrible. It was like the Black Death in the Middle Ages. It started with the first bioterrorism attacks, but then it got out of control. Of course, the antibiotics didn't work anymore because they'd used them for farm animals, and the germs developed resistance. So when the big plagues came, millions of people died, just like they did in 1919. Come to think of it, our global plague started 100 years later in 2019. Oh, I lost a lot of friends back then, a lot of friends.
Well, what about, didn't Medicare help you?
Medicare? Oh, Medicare was supposed to help, but you remember when it collapsed, don't you? Oh, it was a sad story. We all counted on Medicare, but by 2015 it became partly privatized, and I was retired by then, so I couldn't afford it anyway. And then when the plagues came 4 years later, Medicare started rationing. It's been pretty bad. It's been pretty bad.
Well, how about other people your age?
Well, I was just a year older than the oldest of the baby boomers, so I consider myself one of them. And as a generation, we never thought that bad things could happen to us. But by 2030, we had 14 million cases of Alzheimer's disease. 14 million. It was an epidemic. There's still no cure today, but at least they have that new euthanasia law. So that puts a limit on health care. It was the great philosopher Woody Allen who once said, death is the best way of cutting down on expenses. And he was right about that one. Yeah, he was right.
Well, it sounds like old age didn't turn exactly what the flower children expected it to be during the 60s. I'm sure younger people in this century were sympathetic, weren't they?
Well, Paula, don't get me started on that. The young people really weren't prepared to cope with the world they inherited, the bankruptcies, the health care costs, and then all those old people like me who depended on the government. My kids ended up paying 30% of their income to support the old folks, and they resented it, I'll tell you. But the kids, they weren't prepared for the world they had to face. The education system was out of control, first with great inflation, standardized tests for everything, and that cure was worse than the disease. Schooling became one big factory system.
How did you support yourself after age 65?
Well, I'm sure you remember how Social Security went bankrupt. Oh, they just weren't able to fix it in time. So down it went. It was a big shock for all of us. And after 2030, they cut the benefits drastically. You remember there was that big march on Washington to protest, and that was when President Chelsea Clinton was in the White House, and I remember that. She behaved herself better than her father, though, I gotta say.
That's right.
Gotta say, it was a rough time for Social Security. You know, on paper, Social Security still exists, but it doesn't pay enough to live on. So the old people don't get anything, but the young people are angry because they pay so much in taxes. Oh.
Are you okay? It looks like you're sweating.
I'm okay, but it's just the heat this time of year. It's global warming, you know. We had a few hot summers in the late 20th century, early 21st century, but nothing like what came later. It just kept getting hotter and hotter. Then the ice caps melted, the ocean level started rising, and we lost the Netherlands, and then lower Manhattan. It's all gone. Submerged. That happened when the Ross Ice Shelf slipped off Antarctica. You know, down in Wall Street, which is underwater now, when I was young, I was there, but now it's a great spot for scuba diving down by Wall Street.
I haven't asked you this, but did you follow some kind of special diet
Yeah.
or anything that helped you live so long?
Well, you know, I went to my doctor when I was in my 50s, and he recommended this low-calorie diet, caloric restriction, or something like that. So I asked the doctor, if I follow this low-calorie diet, will I live longer, or will it just seem longer? And he couldn't answer. But I guess that diet must have worked, because here I am, and actually, after the economy collapsed, we didn't have much choice about what to eat. Low calorie was a necessity, not an option.
Well, after you became a centenarian, what did your doctor say?
By then, my doctor was dead.
So tell me, is it hard being your age?
Well, aging isn't so bad when you consider the alternative. Not bad at all.
Okay, well, one last question. What is the best thing about being 122 years old?
Let me think about that. You know what it is? Less peer pressure. You know, Mary, I'm getting a little tired now. I think it's time for my nap. I was good talking to you.
Good talking to you,
Thank you
too.
very much.
Thank you, Mr. Moody. It's amazing a man that old can still walk without a walker. I think it's very impressive. That was a pretty frightening glimpse at what the future might hold. We're going to be seeing more of Mr. Moody, but for now, you might ask the question, how much of what you heard might actually come true? We had a lot of laughs about it, but there were some very depressing predictions of a dark future. Alzheimer's epidemics, Social Security bankruptcy, global warming, and all the rest. Later on, you'll get a chance to ask questions of our presenter, and he'll give some basis for whether or not any of these future outcomes is likely or not. So far, we've seen one version of the 21st century, a pretty negative one. Now it's time for a more optimistic picture of the shape of things to come. Why are you all laughing is what I want to know. This afternoon, we have as our very special guest, Mr. Rick Moody, who has just been named winner of the Special Senior Olympics competition for Super Centenarians.
Hey, babe, let's get together. Oh, boy, looking good, looking good.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard about Superman, you've heard about the Bionic Man. Now let me introduce the 122-year-old man. Woo!
Hey, babe.
Good afternoon, Mr. Moody. I want to welcome you and thank you for being with us. You certainly look brisk and bouncy this afternoon.
Yeah.
Well, did I hear that you were winner of the Special Olympics?
The Senior Olympics. Yep. That's right. I won the race. Of course, most of the other people were competing in wheelchairs, but I was still the winner. Did well.
How old are you, actually?
Well, today is my birthday, so I'm 122 years old. Actually, not all of me. My knee replacement is 30 years old. My hip replacement, 45 years old. And, I have some other organ replacements, but different parts of me are different ages. But, yeah, today's my birthday, 122.
Well, that's very great. Is this unusual? Do many people live as long as you do?
Oh, we have about 1 million people, maybe more, who are over 100 years of age, and 122 is still unusual. Yeah?
Well, what memories do you have of the 20th century?
The 20th century. Boy, that seems like a bad dream now. Mostly wars. There was that modern 30 years war between 1914 and 1945. Then the Cold War for most of the rest of the 20th century. Lots of little wars in between all over the world. But that's long past now.
Let's see. Well, so tell me what page I'm on here.
Yeah. See, you got some memory problems, babe. I'll give you some pills for that one.
Tell us about your reminiscence of the early decades of the 21st century.
Oh, yes.
What did the economy do?
Oh, the economy. Well, you remember that long wave of prosperity that began right after the recession ended in 2010. After that, the growth just continued. It's been a great century. Just one problem for me. The Dow Jones average last week topped out at over 100,000. I had a chance to buy when the Dow was cheap, when it was only 40,000, and I missed out. If I'd bought stock back then, I'd be a rich man. But I guess you can't look back.
Well, what about politics?
Well, in politics, there were some problems right after the turn of the century with the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. It took a while before democracy started to spread throughout the Middle East, then all over the developing world. But that's made a big difference. Peace came, the terrorists disappeared. Life has been very good. Very, very good.
It sounds like you have a great memory. You don't have any problems in that area at all, do you?
No, I noticed you had a few problems, but not for me, not at all. But then again, why should I? You know, back around the turn of the century, they used to have a disease that was called Alzheimer's. You may not remember that. You have it, yeah. It's called Alzheimer's. A lot of older people began to lose their memory. But you remember Dr. Banfield, the man who won the Nobel Prize for discovering the cure for Alzheimer's in 2015, don't you? Well, with his Alzheimer's vaccine, dementia became a thing of the past, just like Salk and the polio vaccine in the 20th century. So everybody today gets inoculated early. No one develops Alzheimer's at all.
Well, when you look back on more than 60 years in this century, what accounts for the remarkable prosperity enjoyed by the world?
Well, that's a good question. It's a big question. We haven't got time to go into all the details, but I would probably say that the single biggest development was the emergence of controlled fusion energy. And that happened, you remember, in 2017. Wow, that's a half century ago now, but it seems just like yesterday. Fusion energy, controlled fusion energy, it made a huge impact. Powerful magnetic fields maintain a controlled thermonuclear reaction, no waste products, seawater, the ultimate cheap fuel. Now, of course, with that, the need for energy went down because of nanotechnology. Everything today is so small compared to what it was when I was a child. Now, take a look at my computer right here. See that?
Yeah.
1,000 megabytes, gigabytes, 1,000 gigabytes right here on my wrist. And this model right here, it's already out of date. Bill Gates the fourth is trying to sell me an even faster wrist computer. But hey, look, I'm going to show you something else. See this?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
What is that you're holding in your hand there?
Well, can't you see my hearing aid? I know it's microscopic, but you better get your eyes checked. Somebody your age ought to be able to see a micro hearing aid. You know, you can get an implant like this for your eyeballs, ears, everything else. No problems.
What about global warming? Wasn't there a lot of concern about that at one time?
Global warming. Boy, there's a phrase I haven't heard in a long time. You may not be old enough to remember, people actually used to worry about global warming. It's amazing, you know. After fusion power came in, and that made possible the planetary cooling system. It completely ended the threat of global warming. But some of us old-timers do remember the phrase global warming, the environmental problems of the old days. Well, that's a phrase for the history books, global warming. Gives me a laugh.
Now, can I ask you a personal question?
Sure.
Are you married?
Well, I'm not married now, but recently I went into a retirement community and I was walking across the dining room when a woman ran up to me and said, "Stop," she said, "stop." She said, "You look just like my third husband." So I asked her, "How many did you have?" And she said, "2." Okay, well, what I'm trying to say is the women are always after me, you know. I could get married pretty easily if I wanted to, but I'd rather play the field, you know, it's like.
Well, Well, did you ever have a midlife crisis or anything like that?
Well, actually, I had my midlife crisis at the age of 65, which is around midlife for somebody of my age. So I asked myself, what are you going to do for the rest of your life? You know, in the 20th century, retirement used to be a third of people's lives. But for me, it could have been half of my life, but it turned out very differently.
Well, tell us about your career. When did you actually retire?
Well, retirement today, as you well know, isn't what it used to be back in the 20th century. We don't retire just once. We retire over and over again, many times, because each time you start a new career. So I'm on my third career now. I'm working as a labor mediator, actually. And after I left academia, I then had a long career as a radio interviewer. At my age, might be a little too late to start another career, but I've had a pretty good run, don't you think?
I think so. So in order to re-career, did you continue your education after age 65?
Of course. Doesn't everybody? I mean, you know, back in the 20th century, I used to be on the board of the original group called Elder Hostel. And that was a program that was located on college campuses. And after I left, they started mergers and acquisitions and telecommunications, retirement housing, all kinds of things. It was a simple idea, you know, housing exchange, foreign countries. It was great. So I got retrained to become a radio broadcaster, then a labor mediator. Today, people look upon retirement as really just the beginning of a new phase of life. It's called the third age.
Interesting. So how has the educational system changed for younger people?
Well, yes, it's changed a lot because kids today actually have more appreciation than ever for liberal education. And the reason is that they know they're going to have to spend so many different careers in their lives. So instead of specializing early, what they do is to explore, and that's what makes the liberal arts so popular today. You know, I used to be a philosophy professor once, and in those days, philosophy was not a hot subject like it is today. It's a really hot subject with young people as well as older people. So I guess I got out of the field too early.
Interesting. So what about your health? You seem pretty vigorous.
Well, I'm feeling great. I'm feeling great. You know, there aren't those terrible diseases anymore. Heart disease was declining in the late 20th century. Then came the totally implantable artificial heart. That took over the rest. Cancer was completely eliminated by 2040 with gene therapy. And when other things go wrong, people just get an organ replacement, or they get things fixed by genetic engineering. It's a very simple process, you know. A pill. So regenerative medicine has really made a big difference. But I can still remember what old age was like back in the early years of this century.
Are you saying that people today can live forever?
No, no. We don't live forever. It's true that I'm one of the oldest living people in America, but there are others who've made it to 130. I don't think much beyond that, though. Parts do wear out that can't be replaced, in the brain, for instance. So no, we don't have immortality, but we do have what we might call the longevity society, and that's made a huge difference.
Well, I want to thank you so much for speaking with us this afternoon. This has been so interesting. Do you think we can do this again next year?
I don't see why not. You look like a perfectly healthy young woman.
Thank you, Mr. Moody.
That's great. Hey, babe, let's get together.
So that was Rick's speech. No, I'm just kidding. He'll be back and give us some more insights into the 21st century aging philosophy and anything else that happens to pop into his mind. So get ready for an enjoyable conversation.
It was the great physicist Niels Bohr who once said, "Prediction is very difficult, especially about the future." So I don't have any predictions to offer. Instead, what I've tried to offer here is two very different conjectures or scenarios or images of the shape of things to come. There are lots of folks today who subscribe to one or the other of these images. A lot of hope, a lot of fear. What I'd like to do in a few minutes here is to go back over some of the issues raised in these two different scenarios, including things like fusion energy, nanotechnology, the future of Social Security, Alzheimer's disease, on, and try to settle on some facts. Senator Daniel Moynihan once said, people are entitled to their own opinions, they're not entitled to their own facts. So I'd like to focus on what the facts are. What the future will be is anybody's guess. I haven't got a prediction about that. But let's begin at the beginning. Is it possible for someone to live to be 122 years old? The answer is yes. Can everybody hear me, by the way? I was in a restaurant recently, and my wife said, "Excuse me, Rick, would you speak up? There's still a few people in this restaurant who can't hear you." So I have a loud voice. It's a true story, by the way. That's why I've been married 41 years. A record in my generation. I had occasion when I was working for Robert Butler some years ago to meet Jean-Marie Robin, who was the biographer of this lady, Madame Jeanne Calment, who actually did live to be 122 years old. We can't prove that anybody lived beyond that. There are claims about that from people who live usually in out-of-the-way places without birth records. But this one is for real. And if he did her biography, when she was 120 or something like that, the reporters would ask her, "Well, how did you make it this long?" And she shrugged her shoulders and said, "God must have forgotten me." You know, she didn't know. This is what it would be like. She was 14 when the Eiffel Tower was built. She knew Van Gogh. So I got to thinking, what would it be like if I, born the last year of World War II, 1945, if I lived to be 122 years old? It's a thought experiment, an exercise. It would change our attitudes, I suspect, towards the future, towards things like global warming. And I'm going to come back to that. Also, I'm going to come back to the question of what kind of education is a preparation for a world of longevity. And it's not entirely a joke to say that it might be to study philosophy. Truth in advertising, I really did get a degree in philosophy in 1973 and thought about driving a taxi cab. I didn't. But as I said the other day, I went to work for Citicorp, and they were hiring medieval philosophers in those days, which may explain why Citicorp got into trouble. Okay, this is more about Jeanne Calment and what it would be like to live a life as long as she did. And this is me, of course. So what I want us to really do this morning, and then I'm going to go into the future of gerontology in terms of theory and research and practice and all the rest of that. But we can't do that until we get a sense of what the world of the future will be like. And I want to give you one brief concept of what that world will be like that was given to me by Bill Clinton, who was the speaker at my son's graduation 2 months ago. This was at Yale. And he stood up there, brilliant speaker that he is, and he said to the graduating students, he said, the world that you're entering is a world that is unequal, unstable, and unsustainable. Unequal, unstable, and unsustainable. And if anybody doubted that, take a look at your stocks over the last 2 years in terms of volatility. And think about it's a hot day today and what might be like in 10 or 20 or 30 years. So I take what Clinton said very seriously. I said we can't predict much about the future, but guess what? There are a lot of people, I'm 65 years old, as you do the arithmetic. There are a lot of us folks around today. Some will die, like my good friend Patrick, who died at 66 last year. If there's 77 million of those baby boomers, a lot of them are going to live, and they've already been born. So some predictions are relatively easy. And one prediction is that most of those people, barring bubonic plague or hemorrhagic plague or nuclear disaster or something else like that, I'm going to exclude that for the moment, those people are going to continue to be alive, and as you see what's going to happen, big growth. So for anybody here who's studying gerontology, raise your hand. Okay. Here, I'm going to give you some good news, and I'm going to come back to this. The good news is that you're in the right field, right? The bad news is you probably have the wrong product. Not that gerontology is the wrong product, but the product probably doesn't exist yet. Because we have to reimagine what the product will be like for me 10 years from now when I'm 75, or 20 years when I'm 85. And that requires an active imagination. We can't predict that. But some things we can predict. We can. And one of them is that most of those people are going to be around in 10 or 20 years, and therefore they are your customers. That's good news. But the bad news is you're going to have to reimagine who you are and what you do. That's called reinventing yourself, which is what I had to do in 1973 when I got my PhD from Columbia in medieval philosophy and discovered there were no jobs for medieval philosophers. So early on, I had to learn that, and you have to learn that not once, but over and over in our lives. over and over in our lives. We have to constantly be reinventing ourselves. So that's the first prediction, population aging. Very easy to make. I only make predictions that are easy. Second prediction is volatility. And that's what we've already seen in the stock market in the last 2 years. Up, down, et cetera, et cetera. And if you watch Fox News or TV, the business, you're going to see they're running all over the, blah, 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 blah. And you don't know what to think. But the thing that you can be confident of is that China and India were going to be here with billions of people 10 or 20 years from now. And those folks want oil. There's a limited supply of oil. We know that. We know about BP and the oil spill. So as we look to the future, we're looking to a future with lots of global competition for finite resources. You'll see where I'm going with this. This is very important because some of us of my age remember very well the oil shock of 1973 and 1979, and many people in this room remember that too. It may not come as a shock next time, but when the price of gas goes from $4 a gallon to $6 to 10 to 15, that has lots of implications for where people live, for Meals on Wheels, for example, for what shopping centers of the future will look like, for what livable communities will look like. So it's easy to make the prediction that with population trends globally in China and India, and all those people want cars, that has implications for an older population. Remember, that's already my first prediction here in the US. So we need to be thinking about that, anticipating it. That's my second prediction, that we were going to have a world of economic demand, volatility, et cetera. The third prediction relates to this environmental issue, and I'm going to come back to the very end, that we're living on a finite planet. The good news is that populations are growing older and in some cases shrinking, like in Italy and Japan. So the best possible news for the global environment is population aging, the shrinking of the human footprint. I'm going to come back to that because people are very pessimistic about aging. They're very gloomy, aging, terrible thing, blah, blah, blah. I'm not, probably because I spent many years. I really was chairman of the board of Elder Hostel. I really did teach in Elder Hostel. And that's one of the reasons why I'm very optimistic, not only about my own aging, but about other people too. So I want you to keep those three mega trends in mind: population aging, economic volatility on a global scale, and environmental threats of one kind or another. This is what you know already. You're in the right business. You're absolutely in the right business. Couldn't be better. The increase in longevity has very little to do with medical breakthroughs. It just has to do with education and living right, et cetera. It may not happen if boomers end up being obese and depressed and other kinds of things, which is a trend that's happening. We can't predict how that's going to turn out, but it may not be that those longevity trends will increase. We don't really know what's going to happen with those boomers because almost anything you can say about boomers is wrong. Why is that? Because there's so many of them, and that means there's so many subgroups. So the idea that the boomers were all at Woodstock or something like, my brother happened to be at Woodstock, but that was 200,000 people. Yeah. All right? That's not a lot of folks. All right? And a lot of people, many more than 200,000 at Woodstock time in 1969, they were in Vietnam, okay? There were more than 200,000 boomers in Vietnam in 1969. So we don't think of that, boomers, but they were. So that's my real point. They're larger in numbers, and almost any generalization you can make about them is wrong, partly because of the age period cohort conundrum, a technical matter. We can come back to that later. But there are many faces of boomers. The thing that is true about boomers is that there's lots of them. And they're that pig in the python that's moving through. And they're going to be there, and that's good business for people in gerontology. And here we are, states with the highest proportion of 65 plus. And what about the boomers? Boomers are all in the same state. The state of denial. And that means that if you're in gerontology and you say, hi, I'm here from Aging Services to help you. Oh, no! I don't want you. I'm not aging. Right? Now, Gloria Steinem will come and say, this is what 70 looks like. But most people, they ain't going to do that. I was brought up as a Protestant. My sister, who's 6 years younger than me, I'm going to tell this story, Jerry, okay? I told you last night about the rabbi. She's 6 years younger than me. So after 25 years of being married to a Jewish guy, she converted to Judaism. She's Jewish. She and her husband just spent the weekend with us last week in Boulder. So our whole family went down for the wedding in Orlando. And we go to the ceremony. The rabbi stands up there and he says to the couple, they've been married 25 years. He says, well, usually at this point in the ceremony, I ask the couple, do you really know what you're getting into, okay? I'm not going to ask you that question. And after the ceremony, remember she's 6 years younger than me, we're on the receiving line, and the rabbi shakes my hand. He says, are you the bride's father? Okay. So I said, no, I'm the older brother. The poor man was mortified. He said, he wanted to, hide, go through the floor. I said, no. I said, Rabbi, don't worry. I said, I'm from AARP. I'm in the aging business. I'll use this as a story. I just did. I just did. And I'll tell him the next time, because I'm friendly with him. I'll tell him that, in fact, I used it with a group here in Portland. People don't like it, okay? When I say to them, oh, you don't look like you're 65. Oh, you're so energetic, right? Just remember Gloria Steinem. This is what 65 looks like. This is what 70 looks like. It's tremendously heterogeneous, to use the technical term. And the story of the 2-year-old, the terrible twos, right? Remember those? Any parents in the room? You can predict terrible twos. You can predict things. When you've seen a 2-year-old, you've seen a lot. When you've seen one 80-year-old, you've seen one 80-year-old. That's all. No predictions there, all right? So you got to remember heterogeneity, but you also got to remember denial, because denial is not just the name of a river in Egypt. Denial is true. It is powerful. It is tremendous force in people's lives. And when we look at the global trends, we can see that this is a global phenomenon, global aging. That's good news. It's happening mainly because there are fewer and fewer younger people being born, declines in fertility. Not that people are living to 122, declines in fertility. Why is that? They sent the women to school mainly. And so as a result, this is not a joke, women's education is the most powerful predictor of changes in fertility. And that, in turn, is the most powerful trend towards population aging, which is actually the salvation of our planet, in my opinion. Now, not everybody agrees with me. This is Pete Peterson, who I had occasion to meet a few years ago. Nice chat with him. Pete Peterson is a man, he's a billionaire. He's established a foundation. And his job in life, he could do anything with his life, right? He could live on the Riviera or something. But he doesn't choose to do that. He chooses to spend all of his money, and I give him credit for this, by the way, because he's a sincere man. And he's sincere in his pessimism. He believes that an aging population is terrible on a global basis, and bad for the United States, bad for everybody. He said to me, he wrote this book called Gray Dawn, which is, again, it's early for Halloween right now, I admit, but he wants to scare you. He wants to scare the living daylights out of you, because we got all these old people, 10,000 turning 60 every day in the United States. And he said to me, I wrote the book Gray Dawn. He said, when Ted Sorensen introduced me at a meeting recently, he held up my book and he said, this is the kind of book which once you put it down, you won't be able to pick it up. Okay? He was right. He was right. Didn't we learn from Ronald Reagan, It's Morning in America? Didn't we learn from Barack Obama, The Audacity of Hope? What sells in America is a positive vision of the future. This is America. This is Portland. This is the West Coast. We got here by, risking everything to come to the East Coast and migrating. We believe in the future. If you're trying to sell people an image of the future, which is gloom and doom, you're not going to succeed. And you shouldn't succeed. So we have to find a basis for hope. And that's what we're trying to do. Now, there is a problem that Peterson is pointing to, and that is that because we got all those boomers, we have fewer workers of working age to support them. All right? Not just in the United States. This is true all over. This is part of what's meant by population aging. And so when we look at Social Security, we do see an issue, and we had a whole session yesterday on this, 2 hours, I think it was, on the future of Social Security. It was kind of a town meeting. I hesitate to use that metaphor. It's kind of misused these days, but it was great because we had a lot of people on Social Security. We had people who were unemployed. We had people for whom Social Security is their vital lifeline. And if those folks and younger people, anybody here under the age of 30, raise your hand if you're under the age of 30. Come on, somebody's under the age of 30. I don't believe it. Okay. Now, I am concerned about you, like my two kids, 22 and 25. Because I'm not going to give a speech about Social Security and AARP. Jerry Cohen is standing back there. Raise your hand, Jerry. Okay, he can tell you all you need to know about this. But we at AARP believe that, yes, there is an issue with Social Security. There are some things that can be done to strengthen it, to make sure it's there for my kids, and we should do those things. Won't solve the federal deficit problem, but it's something we should do. And there's lots of ways to do that. We have a question and answer later on this morning. I'd be glad to go into it. We went to it in lots of detail yesterday. But remember, we don't know what the future will be like. These are alternative scenarios depending upon economic growth rates. If we really had serious economic growth, we got anemic growth right now, we would solve many of these problems. But we don't know what the future will be. All right? This is not the future that we wanted to create. And therefore, we stopped that successfully. But having stopped it, that doesn't solve the problem. Because the people who raised their hand and said they're under the age of 30, I'm not going to take a poll, but most of you don't think you're going to collect Social Security. That's what all our public opinion surveys show, okay? That means we have to... He didn't know what happened. Okay, look, I give Bush credit. He was not running for re-election. He's a sincere man. He really believed that privatization was the way to go. And we need to have debates about this. I don't think it's the way to go, but I respect people who have that view. And let's hear from them, and let's have a debate and find out how we secure Social Security. Winning is crucial to my retirement. This is not going to work. This is why a lot of people have turned off the stock market these days, because they think of it as a giant lottery. It doesn't have to be that way, but you have to be there for the long term. If we take a late retirement and an early death, we'll just squeak by. Well, we are increasing the age. People are staying in the workforce longer. They plan to. We know this from their behavior over the last 10 or 15 years. The age of early retirement is probably over. But when we're doing this, let's remember Social Security has been a huge, but it's by far the most successful anti-poverty program that was ever launched. By far. By far. So we're not interested in promoting any kind of war between generations because, hey, they're my kids. That's why I want to make sure Social Security is secure for them, so someday they're going to collect it. And we need to be paying attention to how we create solidarity, and this is why I'm going to come back to the environmental issues, because those of us who are old, like me, now I've joined the Medicare folks, we have to be concerned about, hey, we had a pretty good ride on this planet. Are we going to leave a good planet for our kids? Well, I was a Boy Scout, by the way. I was an Eagle Scout, actually. And one of the things that they taught us was when we go to a campsite in the wilderness, we clean it up. We take all our stuff out with us. We don't leave garbage behind. If you go into the Pacific Ocean today, way out there, you'll find that there's a whole island of garbage right out in the middle of the Pacific. What's wrong with this picture? Obligations to future generations. Now, I mentioned something about Alzheimer's disease in the negative scenario of the future. Alzheimer's disease is a problem. And anybody here, and I won't take a poll, who's had experience of it as a caregiver in your own family or others, you know it's real. You raised your hand, thank you. You know it's real. And it can be a terrible burden in people's lives. I wish I could tell you that a cure for this is right around the corner, that Dr. Banfield, as in the scenario, Dr. Banfield will invent the cure for Alzheimer's in 2015. I will tell you, Robert Butler was my mentor and my boss, and I had dinner with him a few months ago. He just died this last month, as you may know, and I asked him about the future, because he was the founder of the National Institute on Aging, and he shook his head and said, I'm not sure that we'll find a cure for decades. And that view was corroborated by other neurologist friends of mine, Peter Whitehouse, others who I know. Now, I hope I'm wrong. I hope they're wrong. I hope the amyloid hypothesis turns out to be correct or something turns. I hope all these things happen, but we have to deal with the possibility that we really could have 10 or 12 or 14 million cases of Alzheimer's by 2030 with those boomers. We also have to avoid panicking. And people of my age or older frequently panic. I'll tell you a story about that. Elizabeth and I, this is a couple of weeks ago, we were sitting around having our dinner, and I said to her, my wife, I said, would you pass that green stuff to me for the salad? And she said, yeah, what's it called? And I said, you know what it's called. Okay. We call it, now I call it the guacamole problem, okay? Because usually, over the course of the evening, 5 minutes later, an hour later, oh yeah, that's guacamole, okay? That evening, neither of us could remember the word for guacamole. Has anything like that happened to you? All right. Anybody here who has not had a sort of a memory issue in the last day or so, okay? No hands are up. Okay. If your hands had gone up, I would say to you, I'm a bioethicist and we need to talk about truth-telling, because we all have this vulnerability. We're overexposed to the internet and the newspaper. We got too much coming in. So of course I'm going to forget what guacamole is called. I gave a speech actually after that, and I forgot even then. And some lady in the audience said, "Oh, you mean guacamole, don't you?" It's true story, true story. It doesn't mean I'm losing it, but I could. It could be. And we at Hunter College at the Brookdale Center on Aging were the founders of the National Brookdale Respite Program. Anybody heard of that program? Okay, some have. Alzheimer's disease, respite for caregivers. We started this 15 years ago, and I had a kind of a come to Jesus moment when that program started, because I discovered that there were retired judges and surgeons who had dementia. And I realized this could be me. And yeah, I do exercise. This is my Digi-Walker that Bob Butler gave me. I got 3,200 steps. You may wonder why I'm always walking back and forth here. That's the reason. I'm trying to get some steps on, okay? It's guilt. It's guilt, right? You know guilt, don't you? Guilt, the gift that keeps on giving, as Norma Baumbach calls it. Right? Oh, Jewish guilt. The Jews invented it. The Catholics perfected it. And the Protestants turned it into the work ethic. That's it. So everybody's got guilt. Everybody's got it. Everybody's got guilt. Everybody's got it. And the thing about it is that we want to believe that if only we do some good things, if we walk more, we eat antioxidants, all this stuff, then we're going to be protected from Alzheimer's disease. This is called magical thinking. Magical thinking, the year of magical thinking. And it's not true. This is a specter, and we need to think about how we care for people and why we valorize and celebrate cognition and memory and intellect. This is true for folks like me. People have PhD. Oh, I have a PhD. And I can't remember the word for guacamole, right? Who the hell are you anyway? This is an issue. We've forgotten about the great influenza epidemic of 1918, 1919, when for the first time longevity went down. It's going down in Russia too, by the way. But this was the big event. And could we have an Alzheimer's epidemic in 2019 onto 2030? Yes, we could. The point about antibiotics and farm animals is absolutely valid. It's something we need to be worrying about. Anybody who's in the medical field here knows about resistance to antibiotics. MRSA, if you don't know that word, get to know it. It's a very important word. Next time you check into the hospital, be very, very worried. Now, this is something that we have to pay attention to. I am not in favor of death panels. I am not in favor of suicide as a way of cutting down on costs. I have to acknowledge the reality, because I was there on September 11th in New York City. I was at LaGuardia Airport getting ready to take off on a plane at 9 o'clock in the morning. We turned back at the gate. I came out with thousands of people looked up and saw the World Trade Center burning. So this is real. But how we deal with it should not be a matter of fear and panic. We need to be paying attention to this issue. And I had part of that as my negative scenario. This is already happening. Despite what the deniers say, this is happening. And environment is an aging issue for all the reasons that I've sketched out so far. We are going to have to learn to live in a world of higher carbon dioxide, and we're going to have to live in a world in which India and China, now very small consumers of fossil fuels, become much bigger consumers of fossil fuels. We're living on a finite planet. We face many I'm not a gloomy person. You know that from seeing me here already. I'm quite the contrary. But I believe in realistic hope. realistic hope. And therefore, we need to pay attention to how we develop economic growth in ways that is consistent with our environment. This hasn't really panned out so far, but who knows, it may in the future. Fusion power, for the last half century, fusion power has always been 20 years in the future, and it still is, okay? They haven't figured out how to contain the energy in magnetic fields. If it ever happened, it would be one of the greatest breakthroughs in the history of civilization, because it would yield us this kind of limitless power, the power that moves the sun and the other stars, as Dante said in the Divine Comedy. The new longevity. I want to say a word about people living very, very long. Age denial is a great business. It's a great business. It's sometimes based on falsehood. It is deeply rooted in our entire civilization. It's not new. But the problem with anti-aging medicine is that it doesn't work. There are no interventions except for caloric restriction. Remember that joke? The low-calorie diet, will I live longer or will it just seem longer? Yes. That's the only thing that will really work. I'm sorry to have to give you that bad news before lunch, but that is the bad news. It's been long been our hope, our dream, our aspiration to solve aging as a disease. And Aubrey de Grey, who's a colleague I've gotten to know, really thinks that you can do it. I can't prove him wrong. After all, the scientists claimed that heavier-than-air flight was impossible. And then in 1903, the Wright brothers went into the air. Proved everybody wrong. They're still not quite sure how that airplane worked, by the way, the Wright brothers airplane worked. I'm not joking about this. It's a very complicated process. But Aubrey's theory is that for us to live to be 500 years old or 1,000 years old, which is possible, there's nothing in principle that prevents that. It's not like there's a speed of light kind of concept that limits our longevity. I've written about this. Leonard Hayflick and I have written an article together called Has Anybody Ever Died of Old Age? And the answer is no, nobody dies of old age. Old age is in some ways an artifact, and it could become very different from everything we've thought in the future. I'm not terrified by that, as Leon Cass is. I'm not worried about it. I'm not expecting it, because I think that if we really did live to be 500 years old, it would make us have a very different attitude towards the environment, towards nuclear fuel storage, climate, et cetera, et cetera. What I do think is that for people like us in this room who are in the aging business, the population aging is the best possible news if only we can figure out how to appeal to people in terms of their best hopes. And that means moving up Maslow's ladder. And don't forget, there's folks down here who are worried about falling, who are worried about crime, who don't have enough to eat. So when I talk about positive aging, as I like to do, by the way, I think about this, but I also think about that. And Bill Thomas, my dear friend and colleague, he has a version of positive aging that applies to nursing homes. So even in nursing homes, people who have deficits, we can find ways to enhance their lives. This has got to happen, because we cannot ignore this tremendous population change, not only in the US, but on a global basis. And the way it's going to happen is by rebranding aging. And here's the rebranding that's going to take place. We're going to move, I hope, towards health promotion. That's why we have a new Health Promotion Institute at AARP that I'm developing with the American Federation for Aging Research. We've got to move towards productive aging, which means working longer. And not just working, volunteerism. I spend a fair amount of my time on volunteer work helping small nonprofits with fundraising. I don't get paid for that. There's plenty of other folks out there. I had the great good fortune once to run a program called Faith in Action for the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. There's tremendous goodwill in America. We can enlist productive aging. All those older folks are assets, not liabilities, and conscious aging. That's what we're focusing on in the positive aging work. So we need all of these things. We need a vision of life which is positive. Positive, not that gloom and doom, oh my God, how are we going to deal with all these old people? We need to look upon every person at every age as an asset to society, and the question is, what can we do? Somebody in the session yesterday raised the question, well, how are we going to find enough jobs for all these old people with young people? And I said, that's the lump of labor fallacy, that there's only a limited amount of work to be done. I don't believe it. Economists don't believe it. We just haven't organized to tap the talents of people to enable them to do the work. Now, this is changing. Some people, the graying of the workforce is better news than you think. That's going to be big news for people in business. The big news for us is that early retirement really has started ending. It's turned around, and people are going to have to work longer because of home equity declines, stock market, et cetera. So this historical artifact of the last century, that's over. That's the past. That's your grandfather's Oldsmobile in retirement. That's not going to be true. Have you given much thought to what kind of job you want after you retire? It wasn't just a joke that you retire not once but multiple times. Now my whole focus, as I've told you, is on, and these two gentlemen were great inspirations to me, Ram Dass, who said to us at the Conscious Age, aging is learning to become a nobody. So I appreciated your introduction of me. You know, I'm a somebody, I'm a blah, 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 blah. Let me tell you something. When I stopped working for the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, I expected my phone to ring. Nobody called me. I was all of a sudden a nobody because I didn't have any money to give out. And when I leave AARP, I'm going to be a nobody again. So I need to go to school in the school of nobodiness. Like Emily Dickinson said, I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? That's called, by the way, there's a name for that. That's called spiritual growth. That's called detaching yourself from what other people think you are. And there's another dimension to this that Zalman Schachter, Rabbi Zalman, read his book, wonderful book, From Aging to Saging, talked about. We were in a restaurant once, Reb Zalman, and he said to me, he said, you know, Rick, this aging business is really very simple. He said, the real question is, are you saved? And I said, well, he's a clergyman. What does he mean by that? He said, no, he said, I don't mean it in a theological sense. I mean it in a computer sense. He said, are you saved? Have you downloaded your life experience for the next generation? Have you started doing your legacy work? Have you started doing your legacy? By the way, there's a Reb Zalman legacy project. Reb Zalman lives in Boulder, where I do now. I'm going to see him actually in a week or two. So Reb Zalman, although he can't travel much, and Ram Dass can't travel much because he had a terrible stroke, and read his book, Still Here, in which he talks about what it means to recover from stroke. Don't set up dualistic thinking that says, oh, here we got the positive aging. We got the happy, good elders. I'm going to go to, once when I was chairman of the board of Elder Hostel, a woman wrote me a letter complaining that our insurance policy didn't cover bungee jumping, okay? We want to be the bungee jumper, okay? We don't want to be we want to be the welderly and not the elderly, see? But that's a mistake. That's a mistake. I learned it when I cared for my dear friend Larry Morris, who lived in our house till he died at the age of 97, and I cared for him. He was a Yale graduate too, 50 years older than me. And he got to the point where I had diapers, transfer board, wheelchair. He did everything right. You can do everything right. It doesn't matter. You don't control your fate. What matters is, who am I when I lose all the other things? What matters is, what do I do for the people who come after me? That's what matters. And we can learn lessons from the great artists. I have a whole session which I do on Rembrandt's self-portraits and Louise Nevelson, Georgia O'Keeffe, others like that. I'm not going to talk about the 5 stages of the soul. I wrote a book about it, but that's what this is all about. 5 stages of the soul is the road less traveled for aging boomers. And so we can talk about living a long time. We can have pro-longevity dreams. We can hope that we'll have medical breakthroughs. We need to fix Social Security. We need to change our vision of retirement. It's not going to be the same as it was. We need to promote lifelong learning. We need to remember that our brain has the capacity to grow, even if we can't remember guacamole. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We need a vision of positive aging. It's the only thing that will sell. It's the only, especially for people in long-term care or people like Larry Morris who are bedbound. And the day he died, he was bedbound, but he was reading the life of St. Francis Assisi and Rumi that I would read to him. You've got great prospects in the aging business. I want to ask, here's a trick question. How many people here come from financial services? Raise your hand. 1 or 2 or 3. How about travel and hospitality? Raise your hand. 1, okay. How about retirement housing? Anybody in that field? Okay. Guess where all the rest of you are from? What's wrong with this picture? What's wrong with this picture is that you're missing 3/4 of the growth of the silver industries that are going to grow over the next 20 years. You need to get on the train. It's pulling out of the station. What we are doing at AARP is trying to reimagine America in a positive way. And, you know, we have a, we have a problem. I admit that we have a problem, okay? Jerry, this is the branding problem, right, Jerry?
We're going to the dogs otherwise.
We're going to the dogs. You got a good dog there, okay? He's an old dog, okay? We got a problem here. I'm going to need a hug, Maurice. It's from the AARP. There she is holding her letter. You know, we know where you live. We're very good at finding you when you turn age 50. What we're trying to do is to be more relevant to help you reinvent yourself for the rest of your life, because that's what you not only have to do, but you want to do, people over 50. And at the same time, Ethel Percy Andrus, who is the founder of AARP, her motto is, what we do for all. That is, we do for younger generations. How to save Social Security for the next generation. This is a picture of babies, okay? So this is where we're at right now. We're at a great moment of crisis. It's not about materialism. It's about hope. It's not about materialism. It's about hope. You do not become happier the more stuff you have. We know this empirically. You become happier when you're connected, as the little one is with the old one. So that's my presentation, Reminiscences of the 21st Century. I'm sorry that I took too long, because it looks like by the clock I only have 5 minutes. But raise your hand, let the rumpus begin.
I would like to know your thoughts about the possibility of saving Social Security by removing the cap on income that's subject to...
Right, removing the cap on $106,000 cap on income subject to payroll taxes. It's one solution, and it could be part of the solution. The problem is that there's a name for it. It's called raising taxes. And a lot of people don't like raising taxes.
The burden on lower income.
I'm not giving you my point of view. I'm just saying that at AARP, we see this as one part. There are many solutions: raising the retirement age, changing the consumer price index, raising the payroll tax. To summarize a long discussion yesterday, we'll probably, at the end of the day, split the difference. Democrats, Republicans, raise taxes a little, cut benefits a little. That's usually how things work. That's politics. Yeah.
On the AARP exhibitor table, there's a nice brochure that gives several of those options.
That's right, right. There are many. It's a great debate. Let's have it in this country. Let's not demonize people who disagree with us. Let's have honest, open debate. That'll be part of the debate. Comments and questions, sir?
It was interesting that you ended with that last slide showing how you leave a legacy. My observation is, as a transplant to the state of Oregon, the first biennium that I experienced here in the legislature, I happened to be down in the Capitol Mall, and I looked over and I saw I witnessed on one side of the Capitol steps were an aging population, and on the other steps, parents with children. And in the center is this pot of money. There seems to be a trend now, and even acute so, all across the nation, where we have the young children and their parents arguing for the dollar, and we have the aging population where services are being rationed, cut. And
2 words for you: fight it.
well, indeed.
Okay? Just as if we pit law enforcement against higher education, that you can construct the budget in as soon as it becomes a zero-sum game, people will fight. You're right. The solution is increase the pie and develop alliances and find constructive ways. I'll just give you one example. People think that the new health care law cuts Medicare. It doesn't. It extends the life of the Medicare Trust Fund from 7 years to 19 years. That story has not gotten out. Okay? No benefits are being cut. All that they're doing is taking Medicare Advantage and putting on a level playing field with the rest of Medicare. Okay? If you want to call that a cut, I'll accept that. But we're not talking about cutting that. We're talking about reducing the rate of growth. We need to do that to ensure that it becomes sustainable. We need to figure out ways to help those kids, because they're going to be the workers who are going to support me. Right. So let's have the alliances. We can talk later. I'm going to be here through lunch. We can discuss how we make those alliances. You deserve to be called on because you're in the back and you raised your hand and I saw you.
You mentioned the concept of glorifying cognition.
Yes.
If you could talk about that, and Ann Basting has the Forget Memory book.
Yes.
Talk about that whole thing.
Thank you. Ann Basting, a wonderful friend and colleague. Her book, Forget Memory, We so much celebrate memory and cognition in our culture that we forget that that's not really what spiritual, religious, traditional, artistic teachings are all about. They're about something else. They're about the heart. They're about the heart. So if we have that, if we can shift the focus, as Anne is doing with her time slips and other programs, then we'll discover new things about people, as we have in the MRDD field, and Jerry can point that out too. Thank you. That's a great question. Other comments? And I don't want to go on too long because I know you deserve a break. Isn't that a commercial? You deserve a break today? Okay. Yeah.
Sorry. It might be a little bit of a fantasy in coming from another.
I want your fantasy.
Coming from another culture, it's quite a projection onto this country. But as a spirit of the baby boomers, as a group who knew the power of collective action, do you see that happening amongst the group going into this age?
They're too big to make generalizations. A lot of them are out on Tea Party marches. Many others join MoveOn.org. They're too various to be categorized in any one way, but they are in denial about aging. They do have higher education levels than others, and there's lots more of them. What we need to do is to communicate how their interests actually can align with everyone's interest. We need to move from me to we. We can do that, actually. It's possible to do that. That's appealing to America at its best. I'm concerned that our time is over. I want to give you two final thoughts. One is, if you're interested in continuing this dialogue, Jerry Cohn and the AARP table over there will, I'm sorry, Joyce, my interviewer.
And driver.
And driver, yes, she is. I referred to the boss. Anyway, Jerry and Joyce, and I do remember her name, by the way. It's not Mary or Sue or other. They're going to be over there, and they have lots of materials. Either there or at this table back there, you can sign up for a newsletter that I do, an electronic newsletter called Human Values and Aging, which is all about positive aging. And it's free. We're not selling anything. You can become one of my 9,000 closest friends. And just give me your email address. And second, I am selling books and signing them back there. Thank you very much. I'll be here for the duration. Let's continue.